ICM 522 ethics class. I'm Waxi Sargent here, and debating net neutrality from the positive standpoint. They're going to talk about the new ruling that came down January 14th. The net neutrality was basically shot down. So everything that we have been relying on in terms of equality to use the internet is now subject to change. That's the biggest question here, is just what's going to happen, and the ethics involved for me are just, I guess, the ethics of mainly equality. How is it that people are going to all feel like they have the same ability to have access to free trade, free sharing on the internet without necessarily paying an additional fee? Is it going to become a specialty gold member club for only those that can pay the higher bidding price? And what are we going to do should this stand, and should it not get overturned? It probably will, in my opinion, but if it doesn't get overturned, how do the millions of Americans that are right now relying on that free way to express themselves, to maybe sell things on their mom and pop shop? What about all of us bloggers that write and make our living writing for a living? Those are not really corporate sites where we can afford to pay an additional exorbitant fee to Verizon or AT&T. And what is that going to look like for those of us that are trying to make that happen and keep, again, the equality going? I guess that's my main question. Just in terms of keeping things fair.
Sure. And
go ahead.
Sure. And I'm looking at it from a different rights perspective. As an opponent of net neutrality, I look at it as a way of, do I want more regulations on things in my life? The government wants to come in, the FCC in particular wants to come in and regulate the way ISPs use the internet, but do I really want that regulation in my life? Just like I wouldn't want them telling me who I can marry, or other rights that are important to me, like my reproductive rights. Net neutrality is something that wants to create sweeping regulations across an industry that I think the FCC just doesn't have an understanding of. It's been trying to regulate the internet since it first existed, but it hasn't done a good job in defining what net neutrality is, and specifically finding out a way that it can enforce these regulations with all of those different folks in mind that you talked about, from those mom and pop shops to the bigger broadband companies. How are they going to enforce these sweeping regulations without a great loss? Looking at things like the fact that the web is a free market at this point, having a regulation in place might keep people away from the internet, keep them from wanting to start these new businesses. We're looking at ways that investors will not want to be a part of particular products or industries because it is so heavily regulated. So I just don't think that there has been a good enough definition of net neutrality, and I don't believe that the FCC really knows what they're talking about.
I would agree on that part. I'm not too sure what you mean by folks that are hesitant to start up a business at this point due to regulations. I don't know, go ahead and put up a website if they want to. You can always do a non-commerce site or any other way to drive traffic to let people know what you have available.
Sure. Can you speak up a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was too loud, so is that better?
Yeah, that's great. It's loud is
okay.
good.
So I guess I'm not sure what you're meaning about that last point you made.
Oh, sure. So that it's not really creating a free market?
Yeah, the free market thing's got me pretty confused.
Okay. So right now, the way everything functions is they do function under very little regulation. So with that, a lot more people, and I think industries, just like internet commerce, are more active to join the community because they don't have to follow these strict regulations. And also, it's really unforeseen what type of businesses will evolve from the internet, and how can the FCC necessarily say, I'm going to set these regulations for an industry that it has no idea how it's going to evolve. So that's what I'm really worried about. I think that if the FCC were to somehow gain more access to this industry, to have a better understanding of it, that it may not look to create such sweeping laws.
Okay. Well, I guess my concern is, what is keeping the providers, if they're going to be in charge, from slowing down to a trickle, the site's availability to the sites for the average Joe user, and then allowing those who pay a little higher fee, because that's what this is really about, is that they want to not only charge us for the service provision, the tube that it comes through, but they want us to charge us for what's coming down the tube as well. And that's just basically having us double pay for what we're already, essentially they're already getting that by offering the service. To say that they also need to charge us for what comes out of it is really just a thinly veiled excuse for them to go ahead and make it into who can pay the most. And another example of the 1%, making the most of having the funds and leaving everyone else out in the cold. So how is that going to stay, ethically available for all the millions of people that now rely on it to communicate with people and just do their everyday sharing without necessarily needing to have an expensive corporate website up, but still needing to use the internet the way it was originally designed, which was for everyone to freely, enjoy it. It reminds me of Tesla and his idea of having free electricity for all of us. And, Westinghouse had to step in, and now a lot of us have difficulty getting through the cold months of the year because of, our rent is almost the same price as our electricity bill half the time. That's what we have to look forward to on the internet, I'm afraid. Uh, you know, Trying to make comparisons so we can realize, what's come before and what's going to come after. Well, we didn't know what was going to come before there was, electricity either, and it could have looked entirely different. Um, it's probably a little closer to say something like the cable companies, because this is really what it's designed on. Is what happened is they didn't really realize that the cable companies were going to eventually have all the rest of this internet traffic going on, and the cable companies have been labeled as ISP providers, and essentially what they provide is cable. I think they need to maybe relabel some things instead of necessarily changing all these regulations. They need to go back to considering ISPs as a common carrier, and maybe just relabeling a few things would make it more sensible and go back to what it really is. I think those companies were pushing a few years back to be named something that they're not, and they got away with it for a while, and we kind of need to back up and fix that first. So it's almost a matter of semantics at that point.
Sure. And yeah, I think across the board, it's really about the definitions that are in place.
Exactly.
But who's to say that this is an industry that needs to be so strictly regulated? I totally agree with you on the fact that, yes, consumers are taking the cost in that they're the ones who are paying for these services to come to them. But if we look at some of the companies, the largest companies that are interested in net neutrality, the Googles, the Yahoos, the Microsofts, these are all companies that seek to gain a lot of money from an industry that they're not paying as much into that they should be. So what I'm seeing is if they maintain this net neutrality, then all of these huge corporations that are only going to keep growing, and their products and services are really going to, if not overwhelm our lives, are going to become synonymous with everything else that we use, that we should be careful to go ahead and say everyone has this free access when it's really not on the same level. I'm not Google, I'm not Yahoo, I'm not Microsoft, but I would expect them to take more of the burden in putting money into this network that is going to grow.
So you're great with Google passing on that cost to you as a consumer. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Google's known for its free products, so I don't necessarily see any of these organizations turning it around and saying, we're going to put it on to the consumer. I think what they're going to do is that they're going to build it into the cross structures that they've already just defined.
I know that Verizon themselves, even before net neutrality was overturned, did a way to make money off of this was that they just couldn't do it because of the rules. So, you know, definitely there is going to be some changes in what we're all paying, and really that's what this comes down to. I think a lot of people are throwing a lot of again, verbiage around to make it sound like this is about regulation or this is about what we're looking to the future, and we are, but I guess for me it has more to do with calling an apple and making sure that we're really knowing what we're talking about when it comes to really what's being offered to the end user. You know, I was reading Free Press, how, you know, saying that the tools that the ISP uses to block our communications, they're really the same ones that the NSA uses to spy on the American people, to watch people. So, I mean, if it's a government or if it's a corporation, having that kind of power in the hands of uh, large entities like that don't have our best interest in mind, I mean, it makes the internet much less open and secure, and definitely not used for the purposes that I would want it to be used for. I mean, that's kind of going off on the very far edge of, you know, the worst way to look at it, but essentially it is the same tools. And so that's something we need to think about. You know, the free markets, they keep using the word free market is why we need to do this, but I don't think that's enough to solve this problem. I really think that it's not so much a free market when we're looking at what's being offered to us, and that's the reason to do this, because, you know, there's only one or two carriers for most, way over half of Americans. A lot of us just have, you know, one option where we live for who we can use for ISP. So how is that a free market? You know, we're kind of stuck with, we're not going to go out there and build our own cables and make our own, dig our own lines to be offered something different and have an option. We're pretty much stuck with what we've got. So I find that whole free market argument kind of bizarre.
But from a consumer standpoint, if, you know, we are paying for these services, why should the assumption be made that we should get them for free? Shouldn't we consider this an industry where we do continue to pay for things that are new to us? I think there's a big misconception that everything on the internet is free. I think the fact that we're assigning a cost to these things is just making people mad, and that's not necessarily a way to open up net neutrality and create that as the solution.
I don't think anyone's against paying for, you know, the service, but I think what this is opening up is the ability for only those that can pay the exorbitant prices will eventually be the ones using the internet, and then folks that, you know, don't have the ability to pay that are going to be shoved out or given a little trickle. You know, they really have that kind of power at this point in time. So I think basically back in 2002, they needed to classify the cable providers as telecom services. They're a common carrier, and I think if we would just go back and relook at that, the net neutrality issue would fade away, and all the confusing speak about free markets and being able to have access and would make more sense, because then we wouldn't be even having this same conversation at all. It's
So,
hard. Go ahead.
so the FCC, I mean, basically because they didn't create that definition correctly back in 2002, when .com was in a bust and everyone was scrambling around for the next big thing. So they've
Yeah.
basically created their own debate. They've created the issue, and are they the ones to solve it? I mean, that's a
Well,
big
I'm
question.
not sure that they created. I think it was probably the cable companies themselves were probably came up with the idea as well, and had a lot to do with that going that direction. But they bought into it, and for whatever reason, we tried it that way. We need to relook. The best thing you could do is realize, hey, we made a mistake here. Let's go back and correct it. The internet is a common carrier info service. It's not a cable company. It's not a telecom service, and that's what FCC does. So they're really overstepping their authority here at this point.